She came to the frontier to die quietly. He came to the ridge every morning just to make sure she was still alive. Neither of them asked for what happened next. But in 1882, in a stretch of Arizona territory where the sun burned hotter than mercy and the wind carried more ghosts than rain, two ruined souls collided so hard it cracked them open. There was a storm coming. There was a secret older than the both of them. And by the time the lightning split the roof of her cabin in two, neither one would ever be the same again. If this story moves you, stay with me to the very end. Hit that like button, leave a comment telling me the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let the wind settle, the lantern burn low, and listen. The first time Wyatt Granger saw her, he thought she was a trick of the heat. It was the second week of June, and the Arizona territory was burning down to its bones, the kind of heat that bleached the sky white and made the cattle stand still in the shade of mesquite trees like they had forgotten how to be animals. Wyatt had ridden up the north ridge to check on a section of fence that the wind had been pulling at for a week, and when he reached the top and looked down into the shallow valley below, he saw smoke rising thin and crooked from the chimney of the old Pruitt place. That cabin had been empty for 4 years. He sat his horse for a long time, one hand resting on the saddle horn, the other shading his eyes. The Pruitt cabin sat about 1.5 miles from his own house, low and hunched against a stand of cottonwoods that ran along a dry creek bed. The roof sagged in the middle. The front porch had collapsed sometime during the winter storms 2 years back. Wyatt had ridden past it dozens of times and never thought much about it, except sometimes to wonder if he ought to ride down and pull what was left of the lumber for his own use. Now there was smoke coming out of the chimney, and a wagon, a small one, with a canvas top that had been patched in 3 places with what looked like flour sacking. The mule that had pulled it was tied to the cottonwood, drinking out of a tin bucket, and moving back and forth between the wagon and the cabin door, slow but steady, was a woman. Just a woman. Alone. Wyatt squinted. From 1.5 miles off, he couldn't make out a face. He could see she was tall for a woman, and that her dress was dark, and that she carried things from the wagon like they were heavy, but she was not going to let on. No man came out of the cabin, no child. Nobody hollered to her, and she hollered to nobody. She just walked back and forth, carrying her life into a house that had been dead for 4 years. He sat there longer than he should have, long enough that his bay horse, Crockett, started shifting under him, irritated at the heat. The fence could wait. He turned the horse around and rode home without looking back, but he could feel that thin line of smoke behind him the whole ride down, like somebody had tied a string to his shoulder blades. That night, sitting at his table with a tin plate of beans gone cold, he caught himself looking out the window toward the north ridge. Couldn't see anything from his place. The ridge was in the way, but he kept looking anyway, the way a man looks at a door after he hears a knock and isn't sure he imagined it. Wyatt Granger was 41 years old. He had been a widower for 9 of those years. His wife, Mary, had died in the winter of 1873, of a fever that came on in the night and was gone by morning, taking her with it. They had no children. They had wanted children. Wyatt had built the house for them with his own hands the year before, with a second bedroom that he had not been inside since the day they put Mary in the ground. He kept the door shut. Sometimes he forgot it was there. He ate his beans cold. He washed his plate. He sat by the window a while longer and then went to bed. So, he didn't ride to the ridge the next morning. He told himself he had work to do, and he did. There was always work, on a ranch this size with only 2 hired men and a cook who was older than the territory itself. But by the afternoon, the work had carried him close to the north fence, and from there it was a short ride up the ridge. And from the ridge, he could see her again. She was hanging clothes on a line she'd strung between the cottonwood and a rusted iron hook, still bolted to the cabin wall. The clothes were plain, dark, a few white things that he supposed were undergarments, though he looked away from those quickly out of some old habit Mary had taught him. The woman moved with a kind of careful deliberateness, like every motion cost her something, and she was budgeting carefully. A widow. He knew it before he had a reason to know it. Something in the way she stood, the way her shoulders sat. He had seen it in his own reflection for years, that posture of a person carrying something that nobody else could see. Wyatt turned Crockett around and rode home. He didn't tell the hired men. He didn't tell Old Burl, the cook, who would have wanted to know anyway, because Old Burl was the kind of man who collected gossip the way other men collected debts. Wyatt just kept it to himself, and the next morning he went back up to the ridge again. This went on for 6 days. He told himself a different reason every time. The fence, the cattle, a coyote he'd seen tracks of, the water tank that needed checking. By the 4th day he had stopped lying to himself about it, and by the 6th he had stopped lying with much enthusiasm. He went up to the ridge because he wanted to see her. He didn't know why. He didn't want to know why. He just sat his horse in the shade of a juniper at the crest of the ridge, and he watched her move around her little corner of dying country, and he felt something he had not felt in 9 years, which was a kind of attention, a pull. The world had gone flat for him for a long time, and now there was a small disturbance in it, and he could not stop looking. He never went down. He never came closer than that ridge. He thought she didn't know. On the 7th day, he came up the ridge at his usual hour, around mid-afternoon when the light was hard and the shadows were short, and she was standing at the bottom of the ridge with a rifle in her hands. Wyatt pulled Crockett up so hard the horse threw his head. She wasn't pointing it at him. The barrel was angled down, the butt tucked against her hip in a way that told him she knew how to hold a gun and was not afraid of it. She had walked up the dry creek bed and come around the side of the ridge while he was sitting at the top like a fool, watching her cabin where she was not. She looked up at him. "You can come down off there," she called, "or you can ride home. But you cannot sit up on that ridge one more afternoon." Her voice carried clean across the heat. It was a northern voice, East Coast maybe, educated. Not a frontier voice at all. Wyatt sat there for a long beat. The bay shifted under him. "I meant no harm," he called back. "I didn't say you did," she said. "I said you cannot keep doing it." He thought about turning around and riding home and never coming back. That would have been the easy thing. That would have been the thing Mary would have told him to do, probably, because Mary had been a careful woman who didn't believe in causing trouble where none had been invited. But he had spent 9 years doing the easy thing. He had spent 9 years not causing trouble. And he was tired in a way that did not have anything to do with the heat. He nudged Crockett forward and rode down the ridge slow, hands visible, the way you came up on a man who was armed and might be jumpy. By the time he reached the bottom, she had not raised the rifle, but she had not lowered it either. He stopped about 15 feet away from her and tipped his hat back so she could see his face. She was younger than he had thought, maybe 30, maybe a year or two past. Her hair was dark brown and pulled back tight, and there was gray in it already at the temples, which surprised him. Her face was thin, sunburned across the nose. Her eyes were the color of creek water in the shade, a sort of brown that had green hiding in it, and they were the eyes of someone who had stopped flinching at things a long time ago. "Wyatt Granger," he said. "I own the spread south of here." "I know who you own," she said. "Burl Hennessy came up 2 days ago to sell me eggs and could not stop talking about you." He winced. "Burl talks. Burl talks," she agreed flatly. "He told me you were a decent man who lost his wife and never remarried. He thought that was supposed to recommend you." "It wasn't meant to." "No?" "No, ma'am. Burl just likes the sound of his own voice." A small thing happened around her mouth. Not a smile. Almost a smile. The ghost of one. "My name is Evelyn Hartwell," she said, "and I came out here, Mr. Granger, to be left alone. Not to be looked at from a ridge by a man I have never met. Not to be pitied for being a woman by herself in a falling-down house. And not, before you offer it, to be protected." "I wasn't going to offer." "Yes, you were." He almost argued. He didn't. "I figured," he said, slow, "that you might need somebody to know you were here, in case something happened. Something is always happening, Mr. Granger. That's what life is. I have been through enough of it to know that if I want to survive what comes next, I will have to survive it on my own. I cannot afford to be rescued. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He looked at her for a long moment. The rifle was still down. Her hands were steady on it, but her jaw was tight, and there was a vein at her temple that was moving with her heartbeat, and he realized with a kind of dull surprise that she was not angry. She was afraid. She was afraid of him, and she was afraid of needing him, and the two fears had locked up against each other inside her and made her hard. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "I do." "Then ride home, Mr. Granger, and do not come back up on that ridge." He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." He turned Crockett around and rode home slow, the way a man rides when he has been hit hard and does not want anybody to see him reel. He did not look back. He didn't trust himself to. That night, he sat at his table again with his tin plate, and he didn't eat, and he didn't look out the window, and he thought about the way her hand had been steady on the rifle, and the way her voice had cracked, just once, on the word rescued. He thought, somebody rescued her, and it didn't work. He thought, somebody she loved died, and she thinks if she ever lets anybody close again, she'll have to do it twice. And then he thought, that's not your business, Wyatt. That has never been your business. Leave it. He went to bed and did not sleep until almost morning. 2 days later, old Burl came up from the bunkhouse with a tin cup of coffee and that look on his face that meant he had something to say. Heard you went up the ridge. Wyatt was on the porch, working a piece of leather. He did not look up. Did you? Heard the widow turned you around. Burl? I'm just saying. Don't. Burl took a noisy drink of his coffee. He was a small, wiry man, 60-some years old, with a face like an old saddle and a streak of pure mean kindness running through him that had kept him on Wyatt's ranch through 3 bad winters and a market crash. He had buried his own wife before Wyatt had buried Mary, and he had never said a word to Wyatt about any of it, which was one of the reasons Wyatt loved him. She's lost people, Burl said. He was watching the horizon. I sold her eggs and she paid me out of a tin can, and her hand shook when she opened the lid. There was a child's wooden horse in the bottom of that can, painted. Real fine work. Wasn't no money under it, just the horse. Wyatt didn't look up from his leather. She didn't see I saw it, Burl said. I made out like I didn't, but there was a horse, Wyatt, and the paint was worn off on the saddle from a small hand holding it. Wyatt's knife slipped a 1/4 inch on the leather. He set it down. She told me to stay off the ridge, he said. Then stay off the ridge. I aim to. You don't aim to. Burl. I'm just saying. Burl took another drink of his coffee and walked back to the bunkhouse with the slow, flat-footed walk of a man whose knees had given up on him years ago. Wyatt sat there a long time with the leather forgotten in his lap. He thought about a child's wooden horse in a tin can full of nothing. He thought about a woman who had carried it out into the desert to be alone with. He did not ride to the ridge, but he did not stop thinking about her either. It was a week before he saw her again. He had ridden into town, a place called Bitter Wells, that sat 13 miles south of his ranch in a fold of the desert, where a single bad spring kept 3 saloons, a mercantile, a livery, a barber, and a Wells Fargo office alive between sandstorms. He went in once a month for supplies. He went on a Tuesday, because Tuesday was when fewer people were drunk, and he did not like to be in town when men were drunk. He was loading flour into the back of the buckboard when he saw her come out of the mercantile. She had a small package wrapped in brown paper, and she was counting coins in her palm with the kind of careful concentration of a person who had counted them several times before and was hoping they had multiplied. She had on the same dark dress, but she had put a bonnet over her hair, and from the side in the bright noon sun, she looked tired in a way that was almost worse than the way she had looked on the ridge. She didn't see him. She walked past the buckboard without looking up, and she was halfway to the corner of the saloon when a man came out of the saloon doorway sideways and nearly walked into her. He was big. He was drunk. Wyatt knew him by the look of him before he knew him by the face. A man named Caleb Doyle, who ran a small spread west of the Granger place, and who was a small, mean man trying his whole life to be a big, mean man, with mostly bad results. Doyle saw her, and his face did the thing that men's faces did, which Wyatt hated. Well now, Doyle said. Evelyn took a clean step to the side, her face calm, her eyes on the ground. Well now, Doyle said again, like she hadn't heard him. Ain't you a sight? You're that widow up at the Pruitt place. I've been hearing about you. Excuse me. I'm excusing you. I'm excusing you right out in the street. He laughed at his own joke. He had teeth like an old fence. What's a woman like you doing all alone out there? That ain't right. That ain't natural. Woman needs somebody. Woman needs a man to look after her affairs. I have no affairs that require looking after. Now don't be cold. I'm only being friendly. You ought to come on into the saloon and have a sip of something with me, and we can... No. Talk about your situation. No, sir. She tried to step around him. He stepped with her. That was when Wyatt set the sack of flour down on the buckboard. He didn't move fast. He didn't move loud. He walked across the dusty street with his hat tipped back on his head, and he came up on Doyle's right shoulder and stopped about 1.5 feet from him. "Caleb?" Doyle turned, ready to fight whoever had said his name, and saw it was Wyatt Granger, and the fight ran out of his face the way water ran out of a cracked bucket. "Granger, step back from the lady. I was only being Step back." Doyle looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Doyle. Neither of them moved. It was a thing that happened sometimes between men in the territory, an old quiet calculation that took less than 3 seconds and decided a great many things. Doyle had a knife on his belt. Wyatt had a Colt on his hip. Doyle was drunk. Wyatt was not. Doyle had seen Wyatt shoot a coyote off the back of a steer at 60 yards in a wind. Wyatt had never seen Doyle hit anything except his own wife, who had finally run off 2 summers back, and good for her. Doyle stepped back. "Was only being neighborly," he muttered. "Be neighborly some other way." "Yeah, all right, yeah." Doyle turned and went back into the saloon, slower than he had come out of it, with the slumped shoulders of a man who would tell the story differently to his friends in about 10 minutes. Wyatt did not look at Evelyn. He looked at the saloon door until it had finished swinging. Then he turned around and walked back to the buckboard, and he picked the sack of flour back up, and he loaded it like nothing had happened. He heard her footsteps behind him on the boards. "Mr. Granger?" He kept loading. "Mr. Granger." He turned. She was standing about 6 feet behind him. The brown paper package was clutched against her chest. Her face was white under the sunburn. Her mouth was a thin, straight line. "I told you," she said low. "I do not need to be. I know what you told me." "Protected." "I know what you told me, Mrs. Hartwell. That wasn't for you." She stopped. "What?" "That wasn't for you. That was for him. Caleb Doyle has been needing somebody to tell him to step back for about 15 years, and today happened to be the day. You happened to be standing there. It was not on your account." She looked at him. It was the longest she had ever looked at him. Longer than on the ridge. Long enough that he could see the green hiding in the brown of her eyes, and the small white scar at the corner of her mouth that he had not noticed before, and the way her lower lip was trembling in a way that the rest of her face was working very hard to hide. "That isn't true," she said. "No, ma'am. You're lying to me to spare my pride." "Yes, ma'am, I am." She made a sound. It wasn't a laugh. It was the noise that might have come out of a laugh if a laugh had been possible. "Mr. Granger." "Mrs. Hartwell." "Thank you." He touched the brim of his hat. She stood there a moment longer. He thought she might say something else. He thought she might tell him again to stay off the ridge, or to leave her be, or any of the other things she had every right to say. Instead, she said, "I cannot pay you back for that." "I did not ask to be paid back." "I know you did not. That is the problem." She turned and walked away down the boardwalk, the package against her chest, her back as straight as a fence rail, and she did not look behind her once. Wyatt loaded the rest of the flour. His hands were shaking. He noticed it about halfway through the last sack, and he stopped, and he held them up in front of his face and looked at them, and he thought, 9 years. 9 years and not once. And now over a woman who told you to leave her be. He finished loading the buckboard. He drove home slow. He did not go up the ridge that evening, or the next day, or the day after that, but he could not stop seeing her face when she said, "I cannot pay you back." The way her voice had gone soft. Not soft like surrender. Soft like a wound that had been closed for a long time and had just been touched. The drought broke open for one afternoon at the end of the second week. It was not a real rain. It was the kind of rain that came in the Arizona Territory in summer, which was not really rain at all, but a tantrum. Clouds piling up over the mountains in the late afternoon, black and bruised, and then a wind, and then a hard, short lashing of water that flooded the dry washes for an hour and was gone by sundown. Wyatt and his men spent the afternoon driving the cattle up onto higher ground because the bottoms would flood, and they got drenched and muddy doing it, and Old Burl swore in 3 languages, 2 of which Wyatt didn't recognize. When the storm broke, Wyatt was on the high pasture above the North Ridge. The clouds tore open and there was sun again, hard yellow sun on wet land, steam coming up out of the rocks, and a smell that made him think of his mother's kitchen back in Missouri 30 years ago, of bread dough and wet stone. He took his hat off and held it in his lap and let the sun on his face for a minute. Then he looked down off the ridge toward the Pruitt cabin because he could not help himself, and he saw her. She was standing in the mud in front of her door. She had her arms wrapped around herself. She was not crying. Even from up on the ridge, he could tell that. She was just standing in the mud with her arms around herself, looking at the cabin like it had said something to her. The roof on the back corner had collapsed, just the back corner where the chimney was. Not from the storm. The storm had been short. From the storm, plus 4 years of nobody fixing it, plus today. The water had come in through some weakness in the sod, and the corner had given up. He sat there on Crockett a long time. He did not ride down. He thought of the wooden horse in the bottom of a tin can. He thought of her hand steady on a rifle. He thought of her voice saying, "I cannot pay you back." He turned Crockett and rode home. That night he sat at his table with his beans cold again, and he didn't eat. Old Burl came up to the porch and looked in through the open door and said, "You aim to do something about that roof?" "She told me to stay off the ridge." "That ain't what I asked." "She told me to stay off the ridge, Burl. And you're an honorable man, and you have stayed off the ridge for 16 days. And there is a woman alone in a falling down house with a corner of her roof in her kitchen, and you aim to sit at this table with your beans getting cold and stare at the wall." "Burl, I am asking, Wyatt. I am asking what you aim to do." Wyatt set his fork down. "I aim to ride over there in the morning," he said, "and tell her I am sending 2 of my men with lumber, whether she wants them or not. And if she points that rifle at me, I will tell her she may shoot me if it pleases her, but the men are coming with the lumber regardless, and her opinion on the matter is not the point." Burl made a noise. "What?" Wyatt said. "That's a long speech." "It is. You've been practicing it all evening. How's it sound out loud?" "Worse than in my head." Burl nodded slow. "Well," he said, "she might shoot you." "She might?" "I'd recommend the part about her opinion not being the point. Women love that." "Burl, go to bed." Burl went to bed. Wyatt sat there a while longer with the lantern burning low, and then he got up and walked through his quiet house to the door of the second bedroom, the one he had not opened since Mary. He stood with his hand on the knob a long time. He didn't open it. He went back to his own room and lay on his back with his boots off and his shirt on, and he listened to the wind change, and he thought he heard, somewhere very far off, the first low rumble of another storm coming in from the west. Wasn't another storm. Couldn't be. Storms didn't double back like that in this country. He listened to it anyway. Marquis. In the morning, he saddled Crockett before the sun was up. He told old Burl to load 2 pack mules with cut lumber, nails, tar paper, and a good axe. He told the 2 best of his hired men, a quiet half-Choctaw named Tomas Begay, and a heavy patient man named Henrik Olsen, who could lift a roof beam by himself if he had to, that they would be riding north with him at first light, and they would be working until the work was done, and they would not, under any circumstances, comment on the lady of the house. Both men nodded. Tomas Begay never commented on anything anyway. Henrik Olsen commented on most things, but he had a wife of his own back in town, and he understood, in his slow, careful Swede way, what Wyatt was telling him. They rode out at sunrise. The land was different after a storm, even a short storm, even one that had only watered the top inch of dust. The creosote smelled green. There were small purple flowers Wyatt did not know the name of, pushing up between rocks where he would have sworn nothing could grow. A jackrabbit ran out from under Crockett's feet and disappeared into a stand of cholla like it had been swallowed. He came over the top of the ridge and stopped. Down below, Evelyn Hartwell was standing on her porch, what was left of it, with the rifle in her hands and the bonnet on her head and her chin up. She had seen them coming. She had probably seen them coming from a mile off, the way a person watched the horizon when they had nothing else to do but watch it. He sat his horse and looked down at her. She looked up at him. He raised one hand off the reins, slow, palm out, the way you came up on a thing that might bolt. She did not raise the rifle. She did not lower it either. The 2 pack mules came over the ridge behind him, and Tomas and Henrik with them, and the lumber on the mules' backs caught the morning sun and showed yellow and clean against the brown world. He saw her see the lumber. He saw her face do something very small that she could not stop, a small failing at the corners of her mouth, a softening that was gone almost before it started. He rode down off the ridge for the first time in 17 days. He came across the flat slow with his hand still raised. He stopped Crockett about 10 feet from her porch and he tipped his hat back, and before she could speak, he spoke. "Mrs. Hartwell, I am aware of what you told me. I am here against your instructions. I have brought lumber and 2 of my best men. The lumber is yours whether you accept the men or not. The men will work whether you accept them or not. You may sit on this porch with that rifle and watch us, and you may speak to us or not as you choose. When the roof is fixed, we will leave. You will owe me nothing. This is not on your account, it is on mine. I would like to say one more thing, and then I will be silent." She did not say anything. "Ma'am," he said, "I am sorry for your boy." Her face broke. It broke in pieces, fast, the way a piece of pottery dropped on a hard floor breaks. Not in slow motion, but all at once, with no warning, and you stand there afterward, and you cannot remember the moment it happened, only the after. Her mouth opened, her eyes squeezed shut, her shoulders folded. The rifle dropped from her hands and clattered on the boards of the porch, and she put both her hands up to her face and made a sound that was not a sound, that was the absence of a sound, that was the noise a person makes when they have been holding their breath underwater for a long time and have just come up. He swung down off Crockett. He did not go to her. He stood beside his horse, one hand on the saddle, and he kept his eyes down on the wet ground at his feet, because he understood, in a way he could not have explained, that she would not want him to look at her right now. He understood it because he had stood like this himself, 9 years ago, beside a grave with frozen ground over it, while strangers tried not to look at him. After a long while, the sound stopped. He heard her draw a breath, a long one, a clean one. "Mr. Granger," she said. Her voice was raw. "Burl Hennessy told you." "He told me about a wooden horse in a tin can." "He's an old gossip." "Yes, ma'am, he is." A pause. "I had a son," she said. "His name was Theo. He was 4. He died of fever. My husband died 8 months later, of something else. A man who could not bear to bury his own child and then went and did it to himself slow with whiskey. The horse was Theo's. He carried it everywhere. The paint on the saddle is from his thumb." "Yes, ma'am." "I came out here because I could not stay in Pennsylvania and look at the doorways of my own house." "Yes, ma'am." "I did not come out here to be looked after." "No, ma'am." "I do not know if I can be looked after, Mr. Granger. I do not know if there is enough of me left." He raised his eyes then, just his eyes. He did not move his head. She was looking at him. "There is enough of you left," he said, "to put a hand steady on a rifle. There is enough of you left to make Caleb Doyle step backwards in the street. I do not know what is left of you, Mrs. Hartwell, and I am not the one to know it. But there is enough of you left to scare a grown man off a ridge, so there is enough of you left." She made the sound that was almost a laugh again. "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Hartwell, fix my roof." "Yes, ma'am." She bent down and picked up the rifle. She did not point it at him. She did not even hold it like a weapon anymore. She held it the way a person holds a thing they have been carrying for a long time and have just remembered the weight of. "There is coffee inside," she said. "If your men want any. It is not good coffee." "They will not mind. I will not come out and serve it. I will leave the pot on the stove." "That is fine." "And Mr. Granger?" "Ma'am, do not say anything else kind to me today. I do not have any more room in me for it." "No, ma'am." She turned and went into the cabin. The door closed behind her softly, not like an angry door, just a door that needed to be between her and the world for a while. Wyatt stood beside his horse for a long minute with his eyes closed. When he opened them, Tomas Begay and Henrik Olsen had come down the ridge and were sitting their horses about 20 yards behind him, waiting, with the patient stillness of men who had understood, without being told, that they were to wait. Wyatt turned to them. "Boys," he said, "we have work to do." They started unloading the mules. Wyatt walked around the side of the cabin to look at the collapsed corner. The sod had given out where the rafters met the back wall, and there was a hole the size of a wagon wheel showing dark sky from inside the kitchen. He stood there a while looking at it. He thought about how he was going to fix it and what order to do the work in, and whether the cottonwood beam at the back would hold, or whether they would have to pull the whole thing down and reframe it. He also thought, without meaning to, about a 4-year-old boy named Theo who had carried a wooden horse everywhere he went. He thought, his mother is in there, on the other side of this wall, with the door closed. He thought, Mine never had any. Not one. I built a room for one, and the room is still empty. He set his hat lower on his head and pulled his gloves on and picked up the axe. The wind shifted again, dry and warm. The clouds that had been piled along the western horizon when he rode out had thinned and gone. There would be no storm today, just work. He swung the axe and got to it. Behind him, inside the cabin, he thought he heard, once, very faintly, the sound of a woman weeping. The kind of weeping that was not for him. The kind that was years old and had been waiting for somebody to fix a roof to come out under. He did not stop swinging, but he listened. He listened the whole long morning. They worked until sundown that first day, and Evelyn Hartwell did not come out of the cabin once. The coffee was on the stove, the way she had said it would be. Tomas Begay went in for it around mid-morning and came back out with 3 tin cups balanced in his hands and the faintest movement around his mouth that, on Tomas, passed for an expression. He set the cups down on the porch rail and said, "She has gone into the back room." "All right," Wyatt said. "There is bread on the table. She has cut 3 pieces, with butter." "All right." She did not look at me. "That is fine, Tomas." Tomas nodded once and went back to the lumber. Henrik Olsson came down off the roof where he had been pulling the broken sod free and wiped his face with the back of his arm and drank his coffee standing in the heat with his eyes closed. He did not say anything. Henrik was good that way. He could feel the weather of a thing without having to ask after it. Wyatt drank his coffee. It was not good coffee. It was thin, and it had been stretched with chicory in a way that suggested she was being careful with it, the way a person is careful with the last of something. But it was hot, and she had cut bread for 3 men she did not know, and he stood on her broken porch and drank it and felt a kind of quiet weight settle behind his breastbone that he did not entirely know what to do with. They got the broken corner stripped down to the original beams by noon. The cottonwood ridge pole was sound. The 2 rafters under the collapse were rotten clear through. Wyatt had thought they might be. He sent Henrik back to the ranch on one of the mules to fetch 2 long pieces of pine he had been holding back for fence posts, and Henrik went without comment, the way a man goes back across 13 miles of open desert when his boss has asked him to. While Henrik was gone, Wyatt and Tomas cleaned out the kitchen. The mud from the storm had pushed through the hole and dried into a thick crust over the floorboards near the stove. The stove itself was an old cast-iron thing, smaller than Wyatt's own, with 1 cracked plate. There was a tin basin on a low table by the window, a row of 3 glass jars on a shelf, 2 of them with flour, 1 with sugar, and very little in any of them. On the wall above the table was a single nail with nothing hung on it. Tomas moved through the room without making a sound, sweeping the dried mud out the front door with a broom that was missing half its bristles. Wyatt found himself standing in the middle of the room a moment too long, looking at the nail. There was a shape to the wood around the nail, just barely visible, a faded rectangle the color of cream against the smoke-darkened boards. Something had hung there for a long time and then been taken down. He could see, if he stepped closer, 2 thumbprints in the soot under the nail, the size and angle of a woman's thumbs reaching up to lift the frame off. He stepped back. "Are you all right, boss?" Tomas said. Not a question. A statement, the way Tomas spoke. "I am fine. Sweep." "I am sweeping." "Sweep harder." Tomas swept. Henrik came back from the ranch a little before 3 with the pine and a half a side of bacon old Burl had sent without being asked. Burl had also sent a note. Wyatt read it standing in the dust by the mules. It said, in Burl's terrible looping hand, "If she will not take a side of bacon, she is too proud to live. Tell her it is from the cook and not from you." B. Wyatt put the note in his pocket. They set the new rafters before the light failed. It was hot work, and the wood was heavy, and Henrik did most of the lifting while Wyatt fitted and Tomas handed up nails. The hammering carried across the flat in a way that felt obscene in all that silence, like they were knocking on the door of something that had been quiet a long time. When the sun got low and the shadows of the cottonwoods reached out across the dry creek, Wyatt called a stop. They had the rafters up, and a temporary covering of canvas tacked over the gap to keep any night dew out, and the rest could wait until morning. He told Henrik and Tomas to ride back to the ranch and sleep in their own beds, and to come again at first light. Then he stood by Crockett, holding the reins, and he looked at the closed cabin door, and he did not know what the right thing to do was. He could ride home himself. That was probably the right thing, to leave her night. But he had been a working man too long not to know that a man does not leave a job half done with a woman alone in a cabin with a canvas-covered hole in her roof and an old gossip like Caleb Doyle, 13 miles down the road, who had just been embarrassed in the street. He tied Crockett to the cottonwood. He walked to the porch, and he did not knock on the door, because he did not want to make her come to it. He sat down on the top step instead, with his back to the door and his rifle across his knees, and he took his hat off and set it on the step beside him. After a while, the door opened behind him. He did not turn around. "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Hartwell, why are you on my step?" Because I do not trust Caleb Doyle to have stayed in town tonight, and I am not leaving you alone in this house with a hole in the roof and a 13-mile gallop between you and any help." A long pause. "You cannot sleep on my step." "I do not aim to sleep, ma'am. I aim to sit." "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Hartwell." Another pause. He could hear her breathing behind him, and he could hear faintly the sound of her hand against the doorframe, the small dry sound of a fingernail against old wood. "There is supper inside," she said. "Such as it is, you will sit at the table and eat it, and then you will sit on my step, if you must, and you will not argue with me about either." "No, ma'am." "And you will not say anything kind." "No, ma'am." He stood up. He picked up his hat. He turned around for the first time and looked at her in the open doorway with the lantern behind her, and he saw that she had washed her face and put her hair back up, and that her eyes were red but dry, and that she was holding the doorframe the way a person holds a railing on a deck in heavy weather. He stepped inside. The cabin was small and clean in the way a place is clean when somebody has made it clean as an act of resistance against the rest of their life. There was a small wooden table by the front window with 2 chairs, a bed in the back corner, made up tight, with a quilt that had been pieced from a great many small scraps of different colors, most of them faded, a washstand, the stove, and on the wall by the bed, where he had not been able to see it from outside, a single small frame. He did not look at it directly. He looked past it, but he saw, out of the corner of his eye, that it was a photograph, the kind from a tin type, of a small boy sitting on a wooden chair with his hand on the head of a dog that had been arranged to sit beside him. The dog was looking at something off to the side. The boy was looking straight at the camera with the solemn face of a child who has been told to hold still. Wyatt sat down at the table. She put a plate in front of him. Beans again, and a piece of bread, and a strip of bacon she had cut from the side old Burl had sent. "Tell your cook," she said. "Thank you for the bacon." "He said it was from him and not from me." "I gathered that." "He thought you might refuse it from me." "He was right. He often is." She sat down across from him with her own plate. She did not pick up her fork. She watched him eat, the way a host watches a guest who has come on a long ride, and after a minute he realized she was not going to eat anything herself until he had eaten enough to seem polite. So he ate. The beans were better than his own. The bread was good. The bacon was old Burl's bacon, which was the best bacon in 3 counties, and he chewed it slowly and tried not to make the noises a hungry man makes when he eats good food after a day of hard work. "You are a quiet eater," she said. "Mary used to say so." "Mary, my wife, was. Burl told me. He would have." She picked up her fork then and ate, slow, small bites. She did not finish her plate. He did not point it out. When he was done, he stood up and carried his plate to the basin and washed it in the small amount of water she had there, and dried it on a cloth and set it on the shelf above the basin. He felt her watching him. "Mr. Granger." "Ma'am, you wash a plate like a man who has washed a great many of them alone." He did not turn around. He set the cloth carefully on the rail beside the basin. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I have." He put his hat back on. He picked up his rifle from where he had leaned it by the door. He stopped at the doorway and turned back to her. She was still sitting at the table. She had not stood up. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her eyes were on the empty plate in front of her, and the lantern light was on the side of her face, and she looked for one bare second so young that it hurt him to look at her. "Mrs. Hartwell?" "Yes." "The boy in the picture." "Theo." "He has his mother's mouth." She did not answer. He went outside and shut the door behind him soft, and he sat down on the top step with his rifle across his knees, and he watched the dark come down over the desert, and he listened to the cabin behind him, and after a long time he heard a sound he had not heard from a woman in 9 years, which was the sound of someone crying quietly into a pillow, because they did not want to be heard. He did not move. He sat there all night. He was still there when the light came up gray over the eastern ridge. His legs had gone numb sometime around 2 in the morning, and his back was a column of pain from his tailbone to the base of his skull, and he had not slept. Crockett had wandered as far as his rein would let him and stood with one hip cocked, dozing. The desert went from black to gray to the color of old bone, and a roadrunner came skittering across the flat with something in its beak that was still moving, and somewhere up the dry creek a coyote yipped once and went quiet, embarrassed. The door behind him opened. He did not turn. She set a cup of coffee down on the step beside his hat. "You did not sleep," she said. "No, ma'am." "You should have come inside." "I should not have." "Mr. Granger." "Mrs. Hartwell." "You are a stubborn man." "Yes, ma'am." She sat down on the step beside him. Not close, about 2 feet away. She had a cup of her own coffee in both her hands, and she held it like she was warming her fingers on it, even though the morning was already warm and her fingers could not possibly have been cold. She looked out at the desert the way he had been looking at it all night. "My husband," she said after a while, "was a teacher in a school in Philadelphia. He was not a strong man. He was a kind man and a clever one. When Theo died, he sat down in a chair in the front room of our house, and he did not get up out of it for 3 months, except to drink. I would bring him food, and he would not eat it. I would speak to him, and he would not answer. I would tell him I was still there, in the house, and I was still his wife. And I was a person, too, who had lost the same child, and he would look at me, and he would not answer." Wyatt did not move. "He died on a Tuesday," she said, "in November. He had gone out for whiskey. He fell down in the snow. They brought him home in a wagon. I had not known he had left the house. I had been in the back garden, putting bulbs in the ground. Tulips. I do not even like tulips. No, ma'am. After the funeral, my sister-in-law came to me in the parlor and told me that I had failed him, that a better wife would have brought him out of the chair, that a better wife would not have been planting bulbs in November while her husband was dying in the snow." Wyatt's hands tightened on the rifle. "What did you tell her?" he said, low. "Not really a question. I told her she had not been there. I told her that a person who is sitting in a chair drinking themselves to death does not want to be brought out of the chair. They want everyone around them to climb in. I told her I had a husband who was a ghost for 8 months, and a son who was a real boy for 4 years, and I knew which of them I had lost worse. I told her to leave my house and not come back." "Did she?" "She did. I sold the house 6 weeks later. I bought a wagon and a mule, and I came west on the railroad as far as it would take me, and then by stagecoach as far as that would take me, and then I drove the wagon myself the rest of the way. I had a letter from a man named Pruitt, who had advertised this place for sale in a newspaper. He died before I could get here. His widow took my money in Tucson and signed the papers and went back east on the same train I had come out on. We passed each other in the station and did not know it." She was quiet a moment. "I came out here," she said, "because I wanted to be a person in a place where nobody had ever met Theo. I wanted to walk in a doorway that he had never walked in. I wanted to wash a window he had never put a hand on. I thought if I went somewhere new enough, hard enough, empty enough, I would be able to be a woman again instead of a mother of a dead child. And the desert does not work that way, Mr. Granger. I've been here 6 weeks. I see him in every corner of this cabin. He is in the dust on the floorboards. He is in the shape of the window. He is in the wooden horse in my tin can and the photograph on my wall and the cloth I dry my plates with because I made it from one of his shirts." Wyatt closed his eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell, I do not want comfort, Mr. Granger. I am not offering it." "What are you offering?" "I am telling you," he said, slow, with his eyes still closed, "that 9 years ago I built a room in my house for a child who did not come. My wife and I were married 7 years. We tried. There was no child. She died of a fever in the winter, and I shut the door of that room, and I have not opened it since. And I will tell you something, Mrs. Hartwell, that I have not told another living person in 9 years. He opened his eyes. "I am angrier at her for dying," he said, "than I have ever been at anything in my life. I'm angry that she left me. I'm angry that she did not fight harder. I'm angry that she went easy. I'm ashamed of being angry. I have been ashamed for 9 years. And I'm telling you this because you said something yesterday morning that I have not stopped hearing. What did I say? You said you did not know if there was enough of you left. And I have been sitting on this step all night thinking that I have not known either. For 9 years, I have not known. She did not look at him. She kept looking out at the desert. That is a kind thing to say, she said. And I told you not to say kind things. It is not kind. It is true. That is worse. Yes, ma'am. The sun came up over the eastern ridge and put a band of hot yellow light across the porch. Crockett shifted at the cottonwood. Far down the creek, a quail called for its mate, 3 quick notes, and the mate answered from somewhere closer. She drank her coffee. He drank his. After a while, she said, Henrik and Tomas will be here soon. Yes. You should get up off this step and meet them at the ridge so they do not have to see you sitting here looking like a man who has not slept. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Granger. Mrs. Hartwell. Wyatt. He turned and looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her cup. Her jaw was tight in the way he had come to know meant she was holding something in. If you are going to sit on my step at night, she said, you cannot keep calling me Mrs. Hartwell. It is a name I no longer entirely answer to. My name is Evelyn. Evelyn. Yes. Wyatt. I know what your name is, Mr. Granger. Burl told me 4 times. He laughed. It came up out of him before he could stop it, a low, surprised sound, and he saw out of the corner of his eye that one corner of her mouth went up, just a hair, and stayed there for a second, and then went back down. He stood up. His knees cracked like 2 dry sticks. He picked up his hat and put it on, and he picked up his rifle, and he walked down off the porch toward Crockett. Halfway there, he stopped and turned around. She was standing in the doorway now with the empty cup in her hand, watching him. Evelyn. Yes, I will be back in an hour with the men. We will finish the roof today. After that, I will leave you alone, if that is what you want. But I will not stop watching out for you, not on this ridge, from my own house. If a storm comes, I will know. If smoke goes up out of this chimney for too many days in a row, I will know. If smoke stops going up, I will know that too. I cannot help knowing. I have been doing it for almost 3 weeks already, and I would be a liar to pretend I will stop. She looked at him a long moment. All right, she said. All right? I will not ask you to stop. I do not have the strength to ask you to stop a second time, Mr. Granger, and I do not think you would listen. No, ma'am. Wyatt. Evelyn. He swung up onto Crockett. The horse snorted and pulled at the bit, ready to be moving after a long night standing. Wyatt sat for a moment looking down at her in the doorway, and he saw, with a small clean shock that traveled through him from the crown of his head down, that the way the morning light was falling on her face, she was beautiful. Not in the polished way of the women in the catalogs in the mercantile, not in any way that would have been admired by his sister-in-law back in Missouri. Beautiful in the way that a thing that has been broken and put back together is beautiful, with the seams showing and the cracks visible, and the whole of it standing up under its own weight in spite of everything. He felt that recognition land in him, and he did not know what to do with it. So he did what he always did, which was to touch the brim of his hat and turn the horse and ride. He rode up the ridge, and he did not look back until he was at the top. When he turned at the crest, she was still in the doorway, the empty cup in her hand, watching him go. She raised the cup, slow, like a small salute. He raised one finger off the reins. Then he was over the ridge, and she was gone behind him, and the work of the day was waiting. He did not know, riding down the backside of the ridge with the sun in his eyes, that the sky over the western mountains had begun, very faintly, to take on the bruised purple color that meant a storm was building. He had been awake too long. His eyes were tired. He saw it without seeing it, the way a man sees a thing his body has noticed but his mind has not caught up to. He kept riding. The wind out of the west picked up a little, and dropped, and picked up again. Crockett's ears swiveled back once, then forward. Wyatt did not notice. By the time he got back to his own ranch, the wind had laid down again, and Wyatt had decided that what he had seen on the western horizon was nothing. He told himself this while he washed his face at the pump. He told himself this while he chewed a piece of cold biscuit old Burl pushed into his hand without comment. He told himself this when he changed shirts, because the one he had slept on the porch in had taken on a smell he did not want to bring back into Evelyn's kitchen. The sky to the west was a hazy blue. The clouds he thought he had seen were gone, or had never been there, or had been one of those tricks the desert played on a man at sunrise when he had been awake for 26 hours, and his judgment was not what it could have been. Old Burl watched him saddle a fresh horse, a tall sorrel mare named Letty, who had more bottom than Crockett, but a meaner mouth. "You did not sleep." "No." "She let you in the house?" "No." "You sat on her step all night?" "I did." "Like a dog?" "Like a man who did not want her shot." Burl chewed his lip. He looked west. He looked back at Wyatt. "I do not like the air," he said. "It is fine." "It is not fine. I have been on this land 31 years, Wyatt, and I am telling you the air is not fine. The cattle are bunching up against the south fence. The mules will not eat. There is a thing coming." "Burl, I am telling you." "Burl, I have not slept. I am going to get Henrik and Tomas and ride back up there and finish that roof before noon. If the air turns, I will come home. If it does not, I will come home anyway by dark. Either way, the roof will be on." Burl spat into the dust. "You bring her back here if it turns." "She will not come." "You tell her Burl said so." "You tell her Burl said the cabin will not hold in what is coming, and Burl was right about the bacon, and she ought to listen to Burl about the storm." "Burl." "I am not asking, Wyatt." Wyatt looked at the old man a moment. Old Burl had a face that did not lie. It was one of his best qualities, and also one of his worst. Right now there was a tightness around his eyes that Wyatt had seen only 2 or 3 times in 15 years, and every time he had seen it, the weather had done something the territory talked about for a decade afterward. He nodded. "I will tell her." "You will do better than tell her. You will pick her up bodily and put her on a horse if you have to." "Burl!" "Get gone." He got gone. He picked up Henrik and Tomas at the bunkhouse, and the two of them looked at his face and did not ask any questions, because the two of them, between them, had a great deal of sense. They mounted up and rode north with 2 more pack mules carrying the rest of the lumber, the last of the tar paper, and a bundle of cedar shakes that Wyatt had been saving for a project of his own. They came up the ridge a little before 9 in the morning. The sky to the west was still blue. Wyatt looked at it a long moment from the top of the ridge, and Tomas Begay, who had been riding silent at his elbow, said, very quiet, "There is something out past Bitter Wells." "Where?" "Past Bitter Wells, south of the mountains. I cannot see it. I can feel it." Burl said the same. Burl is right. He often is. They rode down off the ridge to the cabin. Evelyn was out at the cottonwood line, washing something in a tin basin with her sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and she straightened up when she saw them and dried her hands on her apron and walked over with her chin up the way she always had her chin up, like she was daring the world to take it down. She nodded to Henrik and to Tomas and to Wyatt last. She did not call him by his name in front of the men. He noticed that and was grateful for it. "Mrs. Hartwell," Henrik said. He took his hat off entirely, which was Henrik's version of speaking at length. "Ma'am?" "Mr. Olson, we will be done by noon or just past." "Thank you, Mr. Olson." "It is nothing, ma'am." "It is not nothing. It is very kind." Henrik turned the color of a brick and put his hat back on and walked away to the mules. Tomas, who was not capable of turning any color at all, gave her a small, deliberate nod and followed Henrik. Wyatt stood a moment with her at the foot of the porch. "You slept," he said. "A little, after you went." "Good. You did not." "I will, tonight." "Mr. Granger." "Evelyn?" "Wyatt." She corrected herself, and a small color came up on the side of her throat that he saw before she could turn her face away from him, and the morning was suddenly worth not having slept for. "Burl says a storm is coming," he said. She looked at the sky. The blue, innocent sky. "There is no storm coming." "Burl says there is." "Burl said the bacon was from him and not from you." "He did." "He is a liar." "About small things, yes. About weather, never." She looked at him. "Wyatt?" "Evelyn, I will not leave this cabin. I have not asked you to." "You were going to." "I was." "Do not." "Evelyn, Wyatt, I have been chased out of one house in my life by something I could not see coming. I will not be chased out of another by something a cook predicts on a clear morning. You will finish my roof. I will sit inside it. If the sky changes, we will talk about it then. He let his breath out slow. All right. All right. Burl will be angry. Burl will live. He told me to pick you up bodily and put you on a horse. He would not say so to my face. No, ma'am. He would not. Then we will pretend he did not say it to yours. She turned and walked back to her wash basin, and Wyatt walked over to the mules, and the work began again. They got the rafters squared and the cross-bracing nailed and the new sod cut and laid by 11. By 1:30, Henrik was up top with the cedar shakes, hammering, sweat running off the end of his nose. Tomas was inside the cabin patching a section of the kitchen wall that had taken water damage from the storm. Wyatt was on the roof beside Henrik, with 2 nails in his teeth and a third in his left hand, and the day was hot and clean and bright, and the sky was an empty blue from horizon to horizon, and he had begun to believe that old Burl had been wrong for the first time in 15 years. Then Tomas stuck his head out the front door and looked west and said very quietly, "Boss?" Wyatt sat up on the roof. The clouds had come back. They had not come from the west, where he had been looking. They had come from the southwest, where the mountains threw a long shoulder out into the desert, and where, ordinarily, the weather did not come from. They were not the bruised purple he had seen at dawn. They were a flat, hard wall of slate gray, with a black underbelly, and they were already taller than they had any right to be at noon, and they were moving fast. He stared at them a long second. The wind shifted under him. He felt it on the back of his neck, cool, then cold. "Henrik." "I see them." "How long?" Henrik squinted west. He had a slow, blunt face that hid a clean weather sense. He had grown up on the North Sea before he came west, and storms were the one thing he understood faster than any other man on the ranch. 40 minutes, he said. "Maybe 30. Get off the roof." They got off the roof. They were not panicked. They were 3 men who had worked weather their whole lives, and they did not waste motion. Henrik gathered the shakes and the hammers and the bag of nails. Tomas came out of the cabin and rolled the tarp and lashed it down over the half-finished section of roof with rope. Wyatt swung down the ladder and went to the mules and untied them and started running them back toward the ridge. Evelyn was standing on the porch. "Wyatt, get inside, Evelyn. Get inside and put everything you do not want broken on the floor. It is not... Evelyn, get inside." She got inside. He came back from the mules at a run. Henrik was already on his horse. Tomas was on his horse. The light had changed in the last 90 seconds. The sun was still up there, but the air under it had gone strange. A pale yellow gray that turned the cottonwoods the color of old brass. And the wind was steady out of the southwest now, not gusting, just a low constant pressure like a hand pushing against the side of the cabin. He shouted up to Henrik over the wind. "Take the mules. Go home. Now." "Boss." "Now, Henrik, you and Tomas, get them back. Burl will need the help with the cattle. Go." Henrik looked at him. Henrik looked at the cabin. Henrik looked at the sky. "Boss," he said, "she should come with us." "She will not come." "Then you stay." "I am staying." "All right." That was the whole conversation. Henrik nodded once and turned the sorrel and put his heels to it, and Tomas went after him at a run, the mules braying and stretching out behind them, and in less than a minute they were up over the ridge and gone, and there was nothing left of them but a low train of dust that the wind took apart and scattered as soon as it was made. Wyatt turned back to the cabin. The sky was a wall. He had seen storms in the territory. He had seen storms that washed out the bottom road and put 2 feet of standing water in his own kitchen. He had seen a tornado once, in '79, walking across the South Range with a slow, indifferent stride that picked up a cow as he watched and set it down a quarter-mile away, dead but unbroken, like a child setting down a toy. He had thought he knew what desert weather could do. He had not seen a sky like this. The wall of cloud was nearly black at the base now, and the top of it was boiling up white into the high blue and then darkening as it went, the way ink runs into water. There was no thunder yet. There was no rain. There was just the wind getting stronger by the second, and the temperature dropping so fast he could feel it on his bare forearms. He led Letty around to the lee side of the cabin and tied her to the iron hook that had been holding the clothesline that first day. He pulled the saddle and the bridle and stacked them under the eave. He put his hand on Letty's neck, which was already going dark with sweat, and said, "You will be all right, girl, you will be all right." Then he went up onto the porch. He did not knock. The door was open. Evelyn was inside, moving fast and quiet, picking up small things and putting them on the floor against the inside wall away from the back corner. The photograph was already off the nail. She was holding it against her chest with one hand while she swept jars off a shelf with the other. He shut the door behind him and threw the bolt and reached for her elbow. "Evelyn, I am almost— Evelyn, look at me." She turned and looked at him. Her face was bone white. Her mouth was a hard line. He could see her hand on the picture frame and the way her knuckles had gone the color of bleached wood, and he knew in that moment that she had understood the sky the second she came back inside, and that she had not let on because she had said she would not leave the cabin, and she was a woman who did not change her mind about things in front of men. He let go of her elbow. "All right," he said. "All right. The roof is half done. The back corner is still tarped. If the wind comes from the west, the tarp will hold. If it comes from the east or the north, it will not. Either way, I want you against the front wall, in this corner, by the door, on the floor, with the photograph. With anything else you cannot lose. Put the table on its side in front of you. Do it now." "Wyatt, now." She nodded once, fast, and she did it. She moved with a precision that he understood was the same precision she had used to lift Theo into a coffin, and to put a husband in a wagon, and to sell a house, and to come across a continent alone, and he loved her for it in a way that he did not know how to think about. He went around the cabin himself, fast, checking. He pulled the front shutters across the window and barred them. There was only one window, the kitchen one, and the shutter on it was sound. He looked up at the rafters they had nailed in that morning. They were green pine and they were holding. The cottonwood ridgepole had been there 40 years. It would hold or it would not. The wind hit the side of the cabin. It was not a gust. It was a wall of pressure, like a hand laid flat. The cabin made a noise it had not made before, a deep wooden creak that traveled down through the floor under his boots. The lantern on the table swung on its hook, and he reached up and unhooked it, and blew it out and set it on the floor. It got dark. Not full dark, the kind of dark that came at the wrong hour, with a sick green-gray light leaking around the edges of the shutter, and a low, constant roar that was not yet the storm itself. It was only the wind ahead of the storm. He went and sat down on the floor next to Evelyn against the front wall. She had pulled the table over in front of them, like he said. She had the photograph against her chest. She had the wooden horse out of the tin can in her other hand. Her knees were drawn up and her shoulders were against the wall, and she was looking straight ahead at the back of the table, and she was breathing very slow and very deliberate. He set his rifle down beside him. "Evelyn." "Yes." "I am sorry." "For what?" "For not making you come with Henrik. You did not make me, because I told you I would not come. That is on me, Wyatt. Not on you." Evelyn. "Yes." "If this roof goes, I am putting you under the bed. There is a steel rail on the bed frame I can see from here. The mattress is straw. It will hold off anything but a beam. If a beam comes, it will not matter where we are. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Say it back to me." "If the roof goes, I am to go under the bed." "Good." She turned her head and looked at him. There were 2 feet between them. "Wyatt." "Yes." "Are you afraid?" "Yes." "Of the storm?" "Some." "And what else?" He looked at her. The bad light from the shutter was on her face. Her hair had come loose at one temple. The wooden horse in her hand was small enough to disappear inside his palm if he had taken it from her, and he understood, looking at her, that he had spent his whole life being afraid of the wrong things. "I am afraid," he said, "that I have known you 19 days, and I am sitting on the floor of your cabin while a storm comes that may kill us, and the thing in my chest is not afraid of dying. It is afraid of what I will do if you do not." She did not look away from him. "Wyatt?" "Yes." "Do not say anything else right now. All right?" "Say it later, if there is a later." "All right?" She put her hand down on the floor between them, palm up. The wooden horse was in her other hand against her chest. She did not look at the hand on the floor. She did not say anything about it. He put his hand in hers. Her fingers closed around his. They were cold. They were small. They were stronger than he had thought a woman's hand could be. The first rain hit the cabin. It did not come like rain. It came like gravel, sideways, against the shuttered window and the closed door and the sawed roof above them. There was a crash that he thought was thunder, and then realized was hail. Letty screamed on the lee side of the cabin, the high broken scream of a horse that had felt something hit her, and Wyatt closed his eyes and held on to Evelyn's hand and prayed without words to nothing in particular that the mare would pull her rein and run. The light went all the way out. The roar became something else. It became a freight train. It became a thing that was not weather any longer. It was a presence, a pressure on the inside of his ears, a vibration in the floorboards under his back. The cabin moved. He felt it. The whole structure shifted on its foundation, a quarter inch, half an inch, and then settled, and then shifted again. Then the lightning came. Not the kind of lightning that came in a normal storm, the kind that lit the sky and went. This was a strike. He saw the green-gray seam around the shutter go bone white. He heard the crack at the exact same instant, which meant the strike was on top of them. The crack was so loud it was not a sound. It was a blow against the side of his head. The cabin made a noise he had never heard wood make. Something above them tore, a long ripping sound that ran from the back corner along the ridgepole toward the front, and Wyatt opened his eyes and looked up in the dark and saw a thin, jagged line of pale stormlight appear across the ceiling above them. The roof was opening. He moved. He did not think. He pulled Evelyn against him with one arm, and he rolled with her along the floor toward the bed in the back corner, and as he rolled he felt the cabin come down on them. It did not come down all at once. The back corner of the roof, the corner they had not finished, the corner where the new pine rafters had been laid in fresh that morning, and where the cottonwood ridgepole tied into the old end of the cabin, that corner went. The sod and the rafters, and a long piece of the ridgepole tore loose under the strike of the lightning and came down in a wet, shrieking mass that filled the back half of the room with smoke and wood and mud and water and a slap of air so cold it took his breath out. A piece of the ridgepole caught him across the back of the shoulder. He felt it before he heard it. It was a deep, heavy blow that drove the air out of him and put him face down on the floor with Evelyn under one arm. He could not move his right arm. He thought, with a dull, surprised clarity, that is broken. He thought, the bed is 2 feet from your face. You have to get her under the bed. He pushed with his left arm. Evelyn was moving. She was alive. She was twisting under him, trying to get her own arms free, and he heard her voice in his ear, close, hot, saying his name once, then again, then a third time. And the third time it was not a question. It was a command. The way she had said, "Step back" to Caleb Doyle in the street, and he heard her and he obeyed her without knowing he was obeying her. He pushed with his left arm and got his knees under him and got her under the bed, all of her, photograph and horse and shoulders and head, and then he turned and looked back into the room. The back wall was gone. There was rain coming straight in. There was a piece of the ridgepole across the kitchen floor, smoking faintly where the strike had touched it. There was a smell of burnt wood and ozone and wet sod, and the wind was coming through the gap in a way that meant the cabin was not done coming apart. A beam above the door cracked. He heard it. He turned and went under the bed beside her with his left arm wrapped around her shoulders and his right arm hanging useless, and a sound coming out of him that was not pain, not yet, because the pain had not caught up to him. The pain would come later. Right now there was only the cold floor and the smell of smoke and Evelyn's breath against his throat, and her hand on the side of his face, holding him there, holding him still, holding him together. The lightning came again farther off this time. The thunder followed it by a count of 2. The storm was moving. It was moving over them. Above them, what was left of the cabin held, just held. The pain came in slow, the way pain does after a body has been told to wait. It started in the muscle along his shoulder blade and traveled down through his upper arm like a hot wire being pulled. He lay very still under the bed with his face turned toward Evelyn's, and he kept his breathing shallow, because each breath put pressure against the broken thing in his shoulder, and he did not want her to hear the noise that wanted to come out of him. She was holding the side of his face. Her palm was small and cold, and it was shaking, and her thumb was moving very slow against the bone of his cheek, back and forth, the way a person strokes a horse to keep it from bolting. He understood that she was doing it more for herself than for him, and he did not say anything. He let her. The wind kept on for a long time. It had a voice, a low one, with no words in it, that moved through the rafters above them and through the broken back of the cabin and through whatever was left of the world outside. And after a while, Wyatt understood that the worst of the storm was past and they had not died. He did not say so. He did not trust his voice yet. Evelyn said it for him. "It is moving off." "Yes." "Are you bad?" "I'm all right." "You are lying to me." "Some." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. The same broken third sound she had made in the street outside the saloon. Her thumb did not stop moving on his cheek. "Wyatt." "Yes." "Do not die under my bed. Do not. I will not survive a third one. I am not dying." "You will tell me if you are." "Yes." "Wyatt." "Evelyn. I am going to come out from under here, and I'm going to look at you, and you will let me." "Yes, ma'am." She came out first, on her elbows, slow, the wooden horse still in one hand, the photograph forgotten, now somewhere on the floor between them. He heard her stand up. He heard her boots on the wet boards, careful, picking her way through the wreckage. He heard her make a small flat sound when she saw the kitchen. "Wyatt." "Yes." "Can you crawl?" "Yes." "Then crawl." He crawled. His right arm hung. He used his left to push and his knees to walk himself out from under the bed. And when his head cleared the edge of the bed frame, the dim wet light from the open back of the cabin fell across him, and he saw her see his shoulder, and he saw her face decide in 1 second that she was not going to be afraid in front of him. She knelt down beside him on the wet floor. "It is your shoulder." "Yes." "Broken or out?" "Out, I think." "Not broken." "Maybe broken. I cannot tell." "Can you sit up?" "I think so." She got an arm under his good shoulder. She was stronger than she had any right to be. She braced and lifted, and he got himself up onto his knees, and from there to a sitting position against the front wall where they had been sitting before the strike. He put his head back against the boards and closed his eyes and let the pain settle into a shape he could name. "Wyatt." "Yes." "Open your eyes." He opened them. She had pulled a length of cloth out of somewhere, fast, and she folded it into a sling as she knelt there in front of him. She did not look at his face. She looked at her own hands. Her hands knew what they were doing. They had done this before. He watched her tie the knot in the back of the sling with the kind of efficient gentleness that he had only ever seen in two kinds of women, which were nurses and mothers, and he had no doubt at all which one she had been. "Theo broke his arm," she said low, while she worked. "He was 3. He fell off the back of a sofa. The doctor showed me how to do this. He said I should know how, in case it happened again. It did not happen again. The fever came instead." "Evelyn." "Do not say anything, Wyatt." "All right." She finished the sling. She lifted his arm into it, and the pain was bad, and he hissed once between his teeth, and she paused and waited and then went on, and when his arm was settled in the cloth, she sat back on her heels and looked at his face for the first time. Her own face was wet. Not all of it was rain. "There," she said. "Thank you. We are going to get you on a horse, Wyatt, if your mare is alive. We are going to get you home to your ranch and to Burl and to a man who knows how to set a shoulder, and we are going to do it before the next band of this storm comes through. Do you understand? Letty. I will look for her in a moment. She might. I will look. You will sit here. You will not stand up until I say so." "Yes, ma'am." She went. He heard her at the door working the bolt with the bolt swollen from the rain. He heard her get it free. He heard the wet creak of the door opening and the rush of the cold air coming in, and then her boots on the porch, and then nothing, because she had walked out into the wet and around the side of the cabin where his ears could not follow her. He sat with his head against the boards and listened to his own pulse in his teeth. The pain had settled. It was a deep, dull animal pain now, not the bright shocked pain of a moment ago. He could think around it. He could not move his right hand, and he did not try. He thought, very slow, if she had been any closer to that corner of the roof, she would be dead under that ridgepole. He thought, if I had gotten her under the bed 2 seconds later, she would be dead. Then he thought, Letty. He could not remember if he had heard the mare after the scream. He sat there with his eyes closed and waited, and did not know if he was waiting for a sound or for Evelyn's voice. And after what felt like a very long time, and was probably less than a minute, he heard a horse blow out, hard and wet, somewhere on the lee side of the cabin. He let his breath out. Evelyn came back through the door a minute after that. Her dress was soaked through, dark with rain and pale with mud at the hem, and there was a long bleeding scratch down the back of her left hand where she had caught it on something on the way around the cabin. She did not look at the scratch. She looked at him. She is alive. She has cut her foreleg on something. She is not lame. She will carry you home if you can sit her. I can sit her. You will tell me if you cannot. Yes. Wyatt. Yes. I am coming with you. He opened his eyes and looked at her. She had her chin up again. The wet hair was stuck to the side of her face. She was still on her knees in front of him, but she was up off her heels now, kneeling tall, and her hands were on her thighs, and she was looking at him the way she had looked at Caleb Doyle in the street. You are coming with me, he repeated. I am not staying in this cabin tonight. It has no back wall. The next band of weather will finish it. I will come to your ranch. I will sleep on the floor of your kitchen if you have a floor in your kitchen. I will not be argued with. Do you understand? Evelyn. Yes. I was not going to argue. Good. I was going to ask you to come. You did not need to ask. No, I see that. Get up off this floor, Wyatt. We are going. Sub. He got up. He could not have said how. The pain came back when he stood, and the room moved a little around the edges of his vision, but Evelyn was at his good shoulder, and he leaned against her more than he wanted to, and they walked together through the wreckage of her kitchen to the front door. He stopped in the doorway and looked back, once. The back half of the cabin was gone. The ridgepole was on the floor where the kitchen table had been. The new pine rafters they had set that morning were sticking up out of the wreckage at angles, smoking faintly from the strike. The shelf with the 3 glass jars had come down, and the jars were broken on the boards in a wet drift of flour and sugar that was already turning gray with rain. The little tintype of Theo was on the floor face down. Evelyn had picked it up coming out from under the bed. He had seen her do it. The frame was cracked. The picture was safe. He looked at the empty nail on the wall. He looked back at her. I am sorry, Evelyn. For what? I'm sorry that I built you this roof and it did not hold. She stood in the doorway with her hand on his good arm, and she looked at the broken back of her cabin. And after a moment she said very quiet, Wyatt, the roof you built is not the part that came down. The part you built held. The part that fell was the old part, the part that had been waiting 4 years to come down. You built me a roof, and the roof held. The rest of the house gave up. There is a difference. He looked at her. There is a difference, she said again. Do not carry the wrong thing out of this door. He did not. He nodded once, and they went down off the porch into the cold, wet light. Letty was standing against the lee wall with her head down and a thin pink line of blood running from her foreleg into the mud. She lifted her head when she saw Wyatt, and her ears came forward, and she blew out at him, the wet-relieved blow of a horse that has been alone in a bad thing and has just seen the man who is supposed to be there. Evelyn went to her first, slow, with her hand out, and put a palm on the mare's neck, and Letty stood still for her. She is steady. Yes. Can you saddle her with the one arm? Yes. If you hold her. I will hold her. He saddled the mare left-handed. It was slow. The cinch was the hard part. Evelyn watched him do it without offering to help, the way a person watches a man do a thing he has insisted on doing, and when he had the cinch tight, she nodded once and stepped back. Up. You first. Wyatt. Up, Evelyn. I will sit behind. The mare can carry us both for a mile. After the ridge, it is flat. We will be at your gate in an hour. She got up. She had not been on a horse in a long time, he could see, but she had been on one once, and her body remembered. She took the saddle. He took the reins and stepped up behind her, slow, gritting his teeth against the pain in his right side as he swung up, and he settled in behind her with his good arm around her waist and the bad arm in its sling against his belly. She was warm against his chest. He had not been pressed against another living person in 9 years. He nudged Letty with his heels, and she walked out from the lee of the cabin into the open weather, and the wind came at them again. But it was nothing like the wind of an hour ago. It was a normal, hard rain wind. It would not kill them. They went up the ridge slow, the mare picking her way through the mud. And at the top, Wyatt turned his head once and looked back down at what had been the Pruitt cabin. It was small from up here. It looked like a thing a child had built and then forgotten. He turned forward again. Evelyn said nothing. She held the saddle horn with her right hand and pressed her left, just lightly, against his arm, where it was wrapped around her waist. He felt her hand there the whole way down the backside of the ridge. Burl saw them coming from the porch. He was standing with a rifle across his arms and his hat pulled low against the wet, and he had been there, Wyatt knew, since Henrik and Tomas had ridden in with the mules an hour ago. When he saw the mare come down off the south slope with 2 riders on her, he did not move at first. He stood very still on the porch and watched them come. Then he set the rifle against the wall and came down the steps and walked out to meet them in the yard. He took Letty's bridle without a word. Burl. Wyatt. My shoulder. I see it. Out, I think. All right. Burl looked up at Evelyn. He took his hat off. He was not a man who took his hat off often. Mrs. Hartwell. Mr. Hennessy. You will come inside, ma'am. Yes. Henrik is in the kitchen. He has water on. Tomas has gone for the doctor. The doctor is 6 hours out at the Patterson place and may not come till morning. I can set a shoulder if it is out. If it is broken, you will have to wait. It is out, Wyatt said. I think. You think? I will be the judge. Burl helped Evelyn down first. He did it the way a man helps a woman down who he has decided, in the time it took her to ride down the ridge, that he is going to treat with a particular kind of careful courtesy for the rest of her life. Then he helped Wyatt down, which was less courteous and considerably less gentle, and Wyatt nearly went to his knees in the mud, and Burl swore under his breath in his 3 languages and got an arm around his ribs and walked him to the porch. Henrik was at the door. Henrik did not say anything. Henrik took Wyatt under his other arm, and the 2 of them got him into the front room and into a chair, and Burl looked at Evelyn and said, Ma'am, there is a kettle on. Tea is in the tin on the shelf above the stove. I would be obliged if you would make a pot. It will steady you. He was telling her to leave the room. She understood it. She did not argue. She went into the kitchen, and Wyatt heard her at the stove a moment later, the small dry sound of a tin being opened, and he closed his eyes and let Burl take his shirt off him. It was bad. It was not as bad as it could have been. The shoulder was out, not broken. Burl's hands moved over the joint, slow and careful, and Burl said, Henrik, you will hold him. And Henrik put his great patient hands on Wyatt's good shoulder and his ribs and braced him against the back of the chair, and Burl put one boot on the chair leg for purchase and took Wyatt's arm in both hands. Wyatt, Burl. This will hurt. I know. Do not yell. There is a woman in the next room who has had a long day. I will not yell. Burl pulled. It was a long second. There was a sound. It was not from Wyatt's mouth. It was from his shoulder, a deep, wet, sliding thunk that was loud enough that the kitchen went silent for the space of a heartbeat. And then the pain went from bright white to dull red, and Wyatt sagged forward against Henrik's arm and breathed and breathed and breathed. There, Burl said. All right. You are an idiot, Wyatt. I know. You let me say the storm was coming, and you went anyway. I had to finish the roof. You had to bring her back. You did not. You went and finished the roof while a wall of weather came over the mountains. Burl, I am not done. All right. You will not do this to me again. Do you hear me? You will not put me on this porch with my heart in my mouth, watching the South Ridge for a man who may not come down it. I'm too old, Wyatt. I have buried enough of my own. Do you hear me? I hear you. All right. Burl turned around and walked into the kitchen. Wyatt heard him stop just inside the doorway. He heard him say low, Ma'am, the tea will be a minute. Sit down a moment. You have done enough standing today. He heard a chair scrape. He heard, after a long moment, the first small breaking sound of Evelyn beginning to cry in his kitchen, and he heard Burl, who had buried 2 children and a wife and most of his friends, sit down across from her at his own table and not say anything at all. But she did not sleep in the kitchen. Burl would not have it. Burl walked through the house with the lantern and stopped at the door at the end of the hall. The door Wyatt had not opened in 9 years, and put his hand on the knob, and Wyatt, who had come in from the front room behind him with his shirt back on over the sling, said, Burl. This room. Burl. Wyatt? Not that room. What? Burl turned around. He was a small man and Wyatt was a large one, and Burl looked up at him in the lantern light with an expression Wyatt had never seen on his face before, which was the expression of a man who has loved another man for 15 years and is about to be unkind to him on purpose. Wyatt, he said, there is a woman in your kitchen who is sleeping on her feet. She has lost her house. She has lost her boy 4 years before she lost her house. She has ridden behind a man with a broken shoulder through a storm, and she has not yet had a cry that lasted longer than the time it took to make a pot of tea. She is not sleeping in the kitchen. She is not sleeping in the front room on a horsehair sofa with the wind coming through the chinking. There is a bed in this room. There is a quilt on it that was made by a woman whose hands have been in the dirt for 9 years. There is a chest under the window. There is one small chair. There is dust on all of it. There is no child in here, Wyatt. There has never been a child in here. There is only the room. And the room is going to have a person in it tonight, because that is what rooms are for. Wyatt did not say anything. Burl turned the knob. The door opened. It opened easy, the way a door opens when the hinges have not been used in a long time, but have not rusted because the house is dry. The air inside the room smelled of cedar and dust. There was a little gray light coming through the one window. The bed was made. Mary had made it 9 years ago on the last morning of her life, before she lay down on it that afternoon with the first chill of the fever. Burl walked into the room and set the lantern on the chest under the window, and the lantern light fell across the quilt, and Wyatt stood in the doorway and could not move his feet across the threshold. Burl turned around. Wyatt, I cannot. You do not have to. Stand there. I will turn the bed down. I will put fresh water in the basin. You will not come in this room tonight. You will sleep in your own bed. She will sleep in this one. That is all. Burl? Wyatt, that is all. He turned the bed down. He took the quilt off and folded it and laid it across the foot of the bed and laid a clean wool blanket from a chest at the foot in its place. He poured water into the basin from the pitcher under the window. He moved through the room with a slow, ordinary purposefulness that was the kindest thing anyone had done for Wyatt in 9 years, because it was not solemn, and it was not careful, and it did not treat the room like a tomb. Burl treated it like a room. When he was done, he picked up the lantern and walked back to the door. Tell her, he said. Wyatt nodded. He went and told her. She was sitting at the kitchen table where Burl had left her, with the cup of tea cooling in front of her and her hand on the table beside it. And when she looked up at him, her eyes were dry, and her face was the face of a person who had used up all the crying she had to give for one day. He stood in the doorway of his kitchen with his arm in its sling and his hair wet against his forehead. Evelyn? Yes. There is a room at the end of the hall. Burl has made it up for you. Wyatt, it was meant for a child. There was no child. The room has been closed 9 years. Burl opened it tonight. He was right to. You will sleep in there. I will sleep in my own room across the hall. The door of that room has a bolt on the inside. You will use it if you like. You will not be disturbed. In the morning, we will speak about your cabin. Tonight, you will sleep. She looked at him. Chita. It was a long look. The lantern was on the table between them, and the light fell on the side of her face and put a long shadow under her cheekbone. Her eyes had the green hiding in the brown again. Wyatt. Yes. You have not been in that room. No. Not once. Not once. And you opened it for me tonight. Burl opened it. At your word. At my word. Wyatt. Yes. Will you sit with me a moment first? He sat down across from her at the table. The kitchen was quiet. Henrik had gone out to the barn. Burl had gone out to the porch, ostensibly to check on the weather, in fact to leave them alone. Outside, the rain had thinned to a steady drizzle, and the wind had laid down to almost nothing. The worst of the storm had moved east. Evelyn put both her hands flat on the table. I want to tell you something, she said. All right. I have been afraid of 2 things, Wyatt, since the day I came west. I have been afraid of having to love somebody again. And I have been afraid of dying before I knew whether I could. I have spent 6 weeks in that cabin doing nothing but pulling those 2 fears around like 2 old dogs on the same chain. Today, the cabin came down, and the chain is on the floor of that cabin somewhere with the broken jars and the wet flour, and I am sitting here in your kitchen and I do not have it on me anymore. He looked at her. Evelyn. I am not saying I love you, Wyatt. I do not know you well enough. No. I am saying I am not afraid of it anymore. There is a difference. There is. You said you had something to say to me earlier, before the strike. You said you would say it later if there was a later. I did. Is it later? Yes. She waited. He looked at his own hands on the table. The right one was useless in its sling. The left one was scarred across the knuckles from a barbed wire pull 2 years back. They were not pretty hands. He looked at them a long moment, and then he looked up at her. Evelyn, I have spent 9 years not knowing what I was. I have run a ranch, and I have buried a wife, and I have washed plates in an empty house, and I have not known if there was a man inside of any of it. Then 19 days ago, a woman moved into a cabin 1.5 miles from mine, and I went up on a ridge to look at smoke, and I have not been the same since. I do not have a speech, Evelyn. I am not a man with speeches. I am telling you that you do not have to do anything with what I have just said. You do not have to answer it. You can sleep in that room tonight, and you can be in your own rebuilt cabin by next month, and you can ride home and never come back to my kitchen, and I will be all right. I have lived 9 years in this house being all right. I can live another 9. Wyatt, but I'm telling you, because you asked, that the thing in my chest when the roof went was not about Mary, and it was not about the room down the hall, and it was not about being alone. It was about you. It was only about you. And I do not know what to do with that, and I am not asking you to know either. She was looking at him. She had not moved her hands off the table. Wyatt. Yes. I will sleep in that room tonight. Yes. I will not bolt the door. All right. And in the morning, we will talk about my cabin. Yes? And the morning after that. Yes. And the morning after that. Yes. She reached across the table and put her hand over his good one. Her palm was warm. The cut on the back of her other hand had stopped bleeding. The wooden horse was on the table beside the cup of cold tea, where she had set it down when she came in from the storm. She did not say anything else. After a while, she stood up, and she let go of his hand, and she picked up the wooden horse and walked down the hall to the door at the end. He heard her open the door. He heard her close it behind her, soft. He heard the small sound of her sitting down on the edge of the bed. He sat at the table a long time after. Out on the porch, Burl coughed once, a small, considerate cough, to let him know the old man was still there if he was needed. Wyatt did not get up. He listened to the rain thin out to nothing. He listened to the wind die. He listened to the house breathe around him, the dry, settling sounds of a house that had been a man's alone for 9 years, and now, for one night at least, was not. The lantern burned low. He let it burn. She came out of the room a little after dawn. Wyatt was already at the kitchen table when he heard the door open down the hall. He had slept maybe 2 hours, in shallow bursts. Every time he shifted his shoulder the wrong way, the pain woke him. He had given up around 4 and come out and built a fire in the stove with his left hand badly, and started a pot of coffee, and sat down to wait for the sun to come up and tell him what had been real and what he had dreamed. She came in barefoot. Her hair was loose down her back. She had on the same dress, with the mud dried at the hem now, and she had washed her face, and she had the wooden horse in her hand the way another woman might have carried a book. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. "You did not sleep." "Some. That is not what I asked." "I slept some." She came to the table and sat down across from him. She did not pour herself coffee. She put the wooden horse on the table between them, careful, like she was setting down a thing both of them owned now. "Wyatt." "Yes." "I bolted the door." He looked at her. "You said you wouldn't." "I know what I said. I bolted it anyway. I sat on that bed for an hour, and I could feel the room around me, and I could feel you on the other side of the wall, and I bolted the door, because I am not ready. I want to be ready. I am not ready." He nodded, slow. "All right. I am telling you because I would rather tell you now than have you wonder. All right. Wyatt." "Evelyn, do not look at me like I have hurt you. I am not looking at you like anything. You are. I am tired. You are looking at me," she said, "the way a man looks at a horse that has thrown him. And I am telling you I have not thrown you. I have only said the truth. There is a difference." He set his coffee down. "Evelyn, I am 41 years old. I have not asked a woman for anything in 9 years, and I do not intend to start by asking you to be ready for me before you are. You bolted the door. The door is yours. The room is yours for as long as you want it. We will go and look at your cabin this morning, and we will see what can be done. And if it cannot be done, we will see what else can be done, and we will not run any of it faster than you can walk it. Do you hear me? Yes. Good. She put her hand on the table next to the wooden horse, palm down this time. Not reaching, just there. Burl is on the porch, she said. He has been there since 4. Did he sleep? Probably not. I do not know why he is so kind to me. Burl has lost more than either of us, Evelyn. He does not talk about it. He had a wife, he had 2 girls. They are all in the ground in a town in Texas that nobody remembers the name of anymore. Burl came west 31 years ago with 1 bag, and he has worked for my father and for me ever since, and he is the only family I have. I think he sees in you what he saw in his wife. I think he has decided you are his now. I think you should let him. She did not say anything. She nodded once, slow. The sun came up clean. The storm had washed the air, and the world out the kitchen window was the kind of bright that hurt to look at, with every creosote bush and every rock standing out sharp against the wet ground, and the sky a blue so deep it almost looked black at the edges. A meadowlark sang somewhere out by the corral, 3 notes that fell down a small ladder, and then again. Burl came in from the porch. He took his hat off in the doorway. He looked at the 2 of them at the table. He looked at the wooden horse between them. There's breakfast to be made, he said. Burl, I am making it. I am not asking either of you. Sit there. He made it. He made flapjacks and bacon and eggs from his own hens, and he set the food on the table, and he sat down with them and ate, and the 3 of them ate together in the kind of careful silence that was not awkward, only new. When they were done, Burl took the plates to the basin and turned on the pump, and over the sound of the water he said, without turning around, Tomas came back at first light. The doctor will not come until tomorrow. All right, Wyatt said. I rode up to the cabin myself. Evelyn went still. How bad? Bad, ma'am. The back is gone. The front wall is leaning. The chimney is on the floor of what was the kitchen. The cottonwood ridge pole is broken in 2 places. Your stove is cracked across the top. The wagon under the cottonwood is fine. The mule is fine. The hens are scattered. Tomas and Henrik are putting the hens back in their pen now. She closed her eyes. All right. It can be rebuilt, ma'am. Not by patching. The whole shell will have to come down. You will be building a new house on the old foundation, with new timbers, with a new roof. That is 6 weeks of work, with 3 men, if the weather holds. Maybe 8. All right? You can stay here, ma'am, while the work is done. In the room down the hall. Wyatt has already said so. I'm saying it again because Wyatt has never been good at making a woman believe him on the first try. Burl, Wyatt said. I am only telling the truth. Burl? Wyatt, drink your coffee. Evelyn made the small sound that was almost a laugh again. It was getting easier to hear it for what it was, now. It was a laugh trying to come back into a body that had not used it in a long time. She looked at Wyatt. I will stay, she said, until my cabin is rebuilt. I will pay you for my keep. Evelyn, I will pay you for my keep, Wyatt, with work. I do not have money. I have hands. I will cook, because I am better at it than Burl, and Burl knows it. Ma'am, Burl said, without turning around, I have been waiting 19 years for somebody to tell me to step away from this stove. You go right ahead. Settled, then. Settled. She picked the wooden horse back up off the table and stood. The morning light from the window was on her face, and she looked, in that minute, like a person who had been carrying a stone for a long time and had just put it down in a place where she meant to leave it. Wyatt, yes. Show me the rest of the house. He showed her. The front room, with its horsehair sofa and a clock his father had brought from Missouri. The small office where he kept the ranch books. The pantry. He showed her every room except the one at the end of the hall, which they walked past together without speaking. And she did not ask, and he did not offer. He showed her his own room, from the doorway only, and she stood in the doorway a moment looking at the bed and the chair and the worn rug, and she said, It looks like a soldier's room. It is a soldier's room. You were not a soldier. No, but I have lived like one in it for 9 years. That is going to change. All right. That is not a request, Wyatt. I did not take it as one. The cabin came down piece by piece over the next 3 weeks. Henrik and Tomas and a Mexican carpenter from Bitter Wells named Inocencio Vargas worked from sunup to sundown. Wyatt was useless for the first 10 days. His shoulder was healing, and Burl would not let him near a hammer. He sat his horse at the top of the ridge and watched the work, the way he had once sat his horse at the top of the same ridge and watched a thin line of smoke. He was a different man on the ridge now. He understood that. Evelyn cooked. She fed 5 men 3 meals a day out of a kitchen that had been a one-man kitchen for 9 years, and she did it with a precision and a generosity that turned Burl, on the 3rd day, into something almost like a child. He kept finding excuses to be in her kitchen. He kept bringing in flowers he had picked up at the edge of the yard, small wild things, and putting them in a jar on the windowsill, and Evelyn pretended not to notice and put fresh water in the jar every morning. In the 2nd week, Wyatt opened the door at the end of the hall. He did it alone. He did it in the middle of the afternoon, when Evelyn was out by the garden behind the house turning over a patch of dirt with Burl, and the men were 1.5 miles north working on her roof. He walked down the hall with his good arm at his side, and he turned the knob and he went inside. The room was different now. Evelyn had been sleeping in it for nearly 2 weeks. She had put the wooden horse on the chest under the window. She had a comb on the small table beside the bed and a piece of dark cloth folded on the chair. The bed was made the way she made it, which was tighter and squarer than Mary had made it, with the quilt folded across the foot. He stood there a long time. He did not feel what he had been afraid of feeling. He did not feel Mary in the room. He had been afraid he would feel her, like a draft, like a question. He felt nothing of her. He felt the room. He felt it as a room. There was sun on the floor. There were dust motes in the sun. There was the small smell of cedar from the chest and the small, dry smell of dust on the lantern and the small, living smell of another person's sleep that had soaked into the air. He understood standing there that Mary had been gone for 9 years. He had known it. He had not understood it. There was a difference. He shut the door behind him soft when he left, and he walked back down the hall, and he did not say anything to anyone about going in there. He told Evelyn 3 weeks after the storm, sitting on his own porch in the evening with the supper plates cleared and the men in the bunkhouse and the light going orange over the western ridge. Evelyn. Yes. I'm going to ask you a thing. All right. I'm going to ask it badly. All right. I have thought about it for 2 weeks. I have practiced it 3 times. None of the practice came out right. Burl says I should just say it. Burl is usually right. He is. I want you to marry me. She did not move. She was in the rocking chair beside his, and she had a piece of mending in her lap, and her hands stopped where they were, with the needle halfway through the cloth. Wyatt, I want you to marry me. I'm not asking out of pity. I'm not asking because your cabin came down. I'm not asking because I'm lonely. I'm asking because I have known you 53 days, and I have been a different man for 53 days, and I want to be a different man for the rest of the days I have left. You will tell me no, and I will accept it. You will tell me to wait, and I will wait. You will tell me to never speak of it again, and I will not. But I am asking, because I would rather have asked badly and been told no than have never asked at all, and have stood on the porch of this house 10 years from now wondering. She set the mending down. She looked at him. Wyatt. Yes. You said it fine. Did I? You said it fine. Evelyn. I do not know if I can do it well, Wyatt. I am not the woman Mary was. I am cracked across the middle. I am going to be a hard wife sometimes. I am going to wake at night and not know where I am. I am going to be afraid some days when there is nothing to be afraid of. I am going to want to be alone in a room sometimes for reasons I cannot tell you. Can you live with that? Yes. You have not even thought about it. I have thought about it for 19 days, Evelyn, from the morning on your porch. Wyatt. Yes. All right. He turned his head and looked at her. All right? All right. I will marry you. I will be a hard wife. You will be a stubborn husband. We will make something out of it. I do not know what. I do not need to know yet. He sat there a moment. He had not realized until she said it how much he had been bracing. He let his breath out slow. Evelyn. Yes. Come here. She got up out of the rocker and came over and sat down on the porch boards in front of his chair, the way a person sits down in front of a person they trust enough to put their back to. He leaned forward and put his good arm around her shoulders from behind, careful, and he rested his cheek against the top of her head, and he closed his eyes. And they stayed like that until the sun went all the way down, and Burl, coming up the path from the bunkhouse to say goodnight, saw them on the porch and turned around without a word and walked back the way he had come. They were married in October. The wedding was small. The justice came out from Bitter Wells in a rented buggy. Burl stood up for Wyatt. Henrik's wife, a sturdy, quiet woman named Inga, who had not met Evelyn until that morning, stood up for her. Tomas Begay was there, and Inocencio Vargas, and the Patterson family from 20 miles east, and a few of the women from town who had decided they would come because nobody had told them they couldn't. Caleb Doyle was not invited and did not come. Evelyn wore a dress that was not new. She wore the same dark dress, in fact, because she said she had been a widow in it long enough that it deserved to be a wife's dress now, too. Burl had argued. Evelyn had won. Burl said, in the kitchen, the morning of the wedding, "She is more stubborn than you, Wyatt. I want it noted." "It is noted. I am pleased about it. I know you are." The new cabin stood finished out on the Pruitt Foundation, with a sound roof and 4 walls and a window that was bigger than the old one. They did not live there. They lived in Wyatt's house. The new cabin was kept ready, and Evelyn went there sometimes alone, in the afternoon, and sat in it for an hour, and came back. Wyatt understood what she was doing without her ever explaining it. She was sitting in a place where Theo had never been, and where her first husband had never been, and where she was alone in a quiet she had built for herself. He never asked her about it. He never followed her. She went and she came back. After a while, she stopped going so often. After a year, she did not go at all. Theo's photograph went up on a wall in their own front room, in a new frame, and a small shelf was built under it, and the wooden horse sat on the shelf. Burl put a fresh wildflower beside the horse every Sunday morning for the rest of his life. Again, the first year was hard. Wyatt would have lied if he said otherwise. There were nights Evelyn woke and did not know him. There were nights she got out of bed and walked barefoot through the house in the dark, and stood in the kitchen looking out the window at nothing for an hour before she came back. There was a morning in February when she sat down at the breakfast table and could not lift her hand to the cup, and she stayed there frozen for 10 minutes, and Wyatt sat across from her and did not speak, and after the 10 minutes she picked up the cup and drank, and they went on with their day. There was the time in April when Wyatt rode in from a fence line in a temper over a calf they had lost, and he was short with her in the kitchen over nothing, and she went very still and turned her back to him and said, "I am not your hired hand, Wyatt. I am your wife. Do not speak to me like that." And he stopped, and he stood there a long second in the doorway, and he took his hat off, and he said, "You are right. I am sorry. I will not do it again." And she said, "You will probably do it again. You are a stubborn man. But you will apologize again when you do, and we will go on." And they had. There was the time in July when Burl, who was nearly 70 now, went down to the South Corral and did not come back up to supper, and they found him sitting against a fence post with his hat in his lap, looking at the sky, perfectly content, and he said, "I am fine. I only wanted to sit a minute." And he had sat a minute. And then they had walked him back up to the house slow, and he had not gone down to the South Corral alone again after that, and nobody had said anything about it, and he had been pleased to have the company. They built. That was the word for it. They built a marriage the way Wyatt had built fences, slow, square, with knots you could feel under your hand. There was no big moment in it. There was no day Wyatt could have pointed to and said, "That is the day I knew." The knowing came in pieces. It came in the way she set his plate down at supper without thinking. It came in the way he learned, after a while, to set hers down too. It came in the way Burl began to call her the missus without irony, and Henrik's wife began to come over for tea once a week without being invited, and Evelyn began sometimes to laugh out loud in the kitchen at something Burl had said, and the laugh was bigger than the kitchen. In the 3rd year, she had a daughter. The doctor from Bitter Wells said it was unusual for a woman Evelyn's age to carry a child to term after what she had been through, and that she should be careful, and that they should be ready for any outcome. Evelyn nodded. She did not tell the doctor what she had already lost. She did not need to. She was careful in the way only a woman who has buried a child is careful, which was to say, not careful at all on the outside and very careful on the inside where it counted. The baby came in March. A girl. Healthy, loud. They named her Anna, after no one. Evelyn had said, in the 8th month, sitting up in bed with her hand on her belly, "I do not want to name her after Theo. I do not want her to carry his name. I do not want her to live in his shadow. I want her to be her own." And Wyatt had nodded, and they had not spoken of it again until the baby was in Evelyn's arms, and Evelyn had looked at her and said, "Anna." And that had been the end of the choosing. Burl wept in the kitchen when he was told. It was the first time Wyatt had seen the old man cry. It was also the last. The years went on. They were not all easy. There was the bad winter of '86 when they lost a third of the herd, and Wyatt thought, for a time, that they would have to sell the south parcel. There was the year a wildfire came up the south ridge and stopped a quarter-mile from the house. There was the spring Henrik fell off a roof and broke his hip, and Inga nursed him in the bunkhouse with Evelyn helping, and he walked with a stick afterward, but he walked. Anna grew up on the ranch. She rode before she walked. She could braid a rope at 6. She had her mother's mouth and her father's eyes and a temper that she had inherited from neither of them, which Burl said came from his side of the family by sheer force of will, and Anna believed him until she was 12. The wooden horse stayed on the shelf in the front room. When Anna was 4, she asked her mother whose it was. Evelyn sat down on the floor of the front room with her, and she held the horse in her palm, and she told her about Theo. Not all of it, the part that a 4-year-old could carry. She told her she had a brother once, and his name was Theo, and he had liked horses, and he had not lived to grow up, but he had been loved very much, and the horse on the shelf had been his. Anna had listened with her whole face. Then she had taken the horse out of her mother's palm, and she had carried it carefully around the front room for a few minutes, and she had put it back on the shelf. She had not asked to play with it. She had understood, the way small children understood things, that it was not a toy anymore. She had patted it once, the way you pat a sleeping cat. Then she had gone outside to find her father. Burl told Wyatt about it that night, with tears in his eyes that he pretended were from the cook fire. "She is a good girl, Wyatt. She is. You did right by her mother. Burl, I am only saying it. Burl, I am old, Wyatt. I am allowed." "You are." Wyatt never stopped watching Evelyn. It was a thing he did not name to himself for a long time. And then one evening, when he was past 60 and she was past 50, and Anna was grown and married to a young rancher from over by Bitter Wells, he stood at the kitchen window and watched his wife in the back garden, kneeling in the dirt with her hair gray now and her hands gray with the dust of the bulbs she was planting, and he realized that he had been watching her every day for 30-some years. He had watched her from the ridge the first time when he did not know her, out of a hunger he did not understand. He had watched her from his own porch the first year, careful, the way you watch a thing that might bolt. He had watched her in the kitchen for 30 years after, the way a man watches the only weather he has ever cared about. He understood that evening that this was the thing he had been doing his whole adult life. He had been a man who watched. Mary had been a kind woman, but Mary had not known he watched her. He had not really watched her. He had lived beside her, which was a different thing. He had watched Evelyn from the first day, and he had not stopped, and he was going to do it until the day he could not. He went out into the garden and got down on his bad knee beside her in the dirt, the one that had never been right since the storm, and he handed her bulbs as she planted them, one at a time, and she did not look at him, but after a while she said, without turning her head, "Wyatt." "Yes. You are watching me again." "I always am." "I know. Is it all right?" "It is the best thing about being your wife, Wyatt. Do not stop." "I do not aim to." She kept planting. He kept handing her bulbs. The sun went down red over the western ridge, and the cattle came up to the south fence, lowing softly, and the smell of the desert at evening was the same smell it had been the morning he first rode up onto a ridge to look at smoke. And the world had not changed exactly, but he had, and so had she, and that had turned out to be enough. There is a thing that people say about losing the ones we love. They say you have to put it down. They say you have to move past it. They say you have to be strong. That is not true. Not the way they mean it. The truth is harder. The truth is that grief does not get smaller. It is the rest of the life around it that gets bigger. The hole in the floor of a house does not close up. You build more house around it. You walk around it for the rest of your days, and you teach the people who come into the house after you to walk around it too. And eventually, it is part of the geography of the place you live. It is part of you. You do not stop missing the dead. You only learn to keep living anyway, beside the missing. Evelyn never stopped being a mother to a 4-year-old boy named Theo. Wyatt never stopped being the husband of a woman named Mary, who had died on a winter afternoon in 1873. They carried those people into their marriage. They carried them right up to the altar with the justice, and into the kitchen with the supper plates, and out into the garden with the bulbs. They did not pretend they had not. They did not try to bury what could not be buried. That, in the end, was the thing that saved them. Not strength, not forgetting, not pretending. It was the small daily decision to keep going forward with the weight in their arms, and to let somebody else walk beside them while they carried it. Two broken people cannot fix each other. Anybody who tells you different is selling something. But two broken people can sit on a porch together in the evening, and they can hand each other bulbs in a garden, and they can build a house around the holes in each other, and that is not nothing. That, it turned out, was everything. Wyatt Granger died in his bed, in the room at the end of the hall, the room that had once been meant for a child who did not come, and was in the end a child's room after all, because Anna had been born in it, and Anna's first child after her. He was 78. Evelyn was beside him. She held his hand. She did not cry. She told him, very quiet, that she had loved him from the day he sat all night on her step with a rifle across his knees, and that she had been afraid to say so for 40 years, and that she was not afraid anymore. He heard her. He squeezed her hand. He went. She lived 4 more years in the house, with Anna nearby. She planted bulbs every fall. She kept the wooden horse on the shelf in the front room. She told her grandchildren about a man who had ridden up onto a ridge once to look at a thin line of smoke, and about a storm that had brought down a roof, and about a small old cook named Burl Hennessy, who had loved her like a daughter and had been right about the bacon. She died on a spring morning with the window open. Anna was beside her. They buried her next to Wyatt, on a small rise behind the house, under a juniper tree that had not been there when they first met. The ranch is still there. Somebody's grandchildren run it now. The original cabin where Evelyn had lived alone for 6 weeks was long ago let go back to the desert, and only the chimney stones remain, and a sunken square in the ground where the foundation was. People sometimes walk out to it and stand and look, and do not know what they are looking at. The wooden horse is gone. Nobody knows what happened to it. Anna's youngest daughter took it when Evelyn died, and after that it goes into the dark of the family the way small, precious things do. And one day it stopped being talked about, and that is all right. The thing it stood for was not the horse. The thing it stood for was a mother who had carried her dead child's small treasured thing across a continent in a tin can, and had set it down, finally, in a kitchen that was not hers yet, in front of a man who had not asked her any questions, and had said, instead, "The boy in the picture has his mother's mouth." That was the moment. Everything after came from that. It is a story about a roof that came down in a storm. It is a story about a shoulder put back into joint by an old man with a kind face. It is a story about an empty room that nobody had walked into for 9 years, and a door that finally got opened. Mostly, it is a story about 2 people who thought they had used up their lives, and found out they hadn't, and decided very quietly, and against their own better judgment, to spend what was left of them on each other. The desert is still there. The wind still comes up off the southwest in the late afternoons in June. The storms still build over the mountains and break over the plain. The roofs still come down sometimes, on cabins where people thought they were safe, and the people inside have to crawl out into the wet light afterward and decide what to do with the rest of their lives. Some of them go home alone. Some of them do not. That is the choice. It has always been the choice.